All right, this just in. The accused White House Correspondents' Dinner shooter has just entered a not guilty plea in court. Cole Allen's legal team is also asking to disqualify U.S. Attorney D.C. Jeanine Pirro and other senior Justice Department officials from the case because they were at the dinner during the incident.
Let's bring in CBS News legal reporter Katrina Kaufman for more on this. So, Katrina, we had this not guilty plea. Is that surprising?
No, it's not surprising, but we now know that he has pled not guilty to these 4 federal charges against him. That includes allegedly attempting to assassinate the president, and they're also claiming a deadly assault or an attempted assault on a federal officer, Chanel. So we now have his not guilty plea. We've also learned that discovery will be beginning soon.
Okay, folks, sit down for this one, because what I'm about to walk you through represents one of the most genuinely revealing moments about Trump's specific shooting security failures. Comprehensive documentation across BBC, Wall Street Journal, Axios, Washington Post, Wikipedia, and other major mainstream sources. Donald Trump has been absolutely relentless about claiming exceptional security messaging throughout his political career. He keeps insisting his security situation demonstrates exceptional institutional support through his various public statements affecting his protection messaging. He keeps claiming his Secret Service relationships reflect strong institutional standards through his characteristic, confident framing. He keeps telling audiences his security context represents legitimate institutional engagement through his specific public statements. He keeps attacking journalists who document specific failures as politically motivated through his characteristic counterattack approach. His whole messaging essentially positions him as exceptional security focus, whose specific situation demonstrates strong institutional support regardless of documented evidence about specific failures affecting actual specific events. But here's what's actually been happening with documented Trump shooting security failures. A bipartisan Senate report specifically called the Butler incident a perfect storm of stunning failure. A House task force report specifically labeled the Butler attack preventable. The Wall Street Journal specifically reports getting into the WHCA hotel was remarkably easy. Axios specifically reports Republicans rallying around a controversial $400 million ballroom and bunker project after the WHCA shooting. Can you believe this? But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video. Let me walk you through the specific Butler rally attack facts first, because they represent exactly the kind of dramatic documentation our headline captures. Trump specifically was grazed in the right ear through documented institutional record. 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks specifically fired 8 rounds through documented institutional record. Crooks specifically used an AR-15 style rifle through documented institutional context. Crooks specifically fired from a nearby rooftop through documented institutional context. The attack specifically killed 1 person through documented institutional outcome. The attack specifically injured 2 others through documented institutional outcome. Law enforcement specifically shot Crooks dead through documented institutional outcome. Wikipedia and BBC specifically reported on the documented Butler rally attack through their institutional reporting. Let me repeat those Butler rally attack facts from every American who cares about institutional accountability. Trump grazed in right ear. 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks fired 8 rounds. AR-15 style rifle, nearby rooftop, killed 1 person, injured 2 others. Law enforcement shot Crooks dead. Wikipedia and BBC reported. The specific Butler rally attack facts represent comprehensive professional documentation defining the dramatic shooting moment, regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. Think about what specifically a 20-year-old gunman firing 8 rounds from an AR-15 style rifle from a nearby rooftop, hitting a presidential candidate in the ear while killing 1 attendee, injuring 2 others represents in terms of comprehensive American security accountability, American security accountability specifically operates through various established frameworks. Specific patterns of gunmen reaching elevated positions and firing multiple rounds at presidential candidates represent fundamental security failure that documented exceptional cases generate. The dynamic demonstrates comprehensive security accountability affecting American constitutional culture, regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. The cumulative effect represents exactly the kind of dramatic documentation moment our headline captures. Come on, are you kidding me? With how dramatically the bipartisan Senate report exposed the stunning failure. A 94-page bipartisan Senate report, specifically called the Butler Incident, a perfect storm of stunning failure. Through their direct quoted characterization, the Senate report specifically said Secret Service lapses were predictable. Through their direct quoted characterization, the Senate report specifically said the lapses were avoidable. Through their direct quoted characterization, the Senate report specifically said the lapses were directly linked to the assassination attempt. Through their direct quoted conclusion, BBC specifically reported on the documented Senate report findings through their institutional reporting. Let me repeat those Senate report details. 94-page bipartisan Senate report, perfect storm of stunning failure. Secret Service lapses predictable, avoidable, directly linked to assassination attempt. BBC reported. The specific Senate report details represent comprehensive bipartisan documentation defining the broader security accountability landscape, regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. Think about what specifically a 94-page bipartisan Senate report calling a Secret Service operation a perfect storm of stunning failure while concluding lapses were predictable, avoidable, and directly linked to an assassination attempt actually represents in terms of comprehensive American institutional accountability. Specific patterns of bipartisan Senate reports characterize Secret Service operations as stunning failures represent fundamental institutional accountability that documented exceptional cases generate. The dynamic demonstrates comprehensive institutional accountability affecting American constitutional culture regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. Now let me tell you about the specific Butler failures context because they represent particularly important documented institutional concerns. The failures specifically included no clear chain of command over the security perimeter through documented institutional finding. The failures specifically included poor coordination with local police through documented institutional finding. The failures specifically included resource denials for the advance team through documented institutional finding. The failures specifically included radio problems that left some agents unable to communicate through documented institutional finding. The failures specifically included failure to secure the rooftop crooks used through documented institutional finding. The failures specifically included failure to visually block the rooftop crooks used through documented institutional finding. BBC specifically reported on the documented Butler failure findings through their institutional reporting. Let me repeat those Butler failure details. No clear chain of command over security perimeter. Poor coordination with local police. Resource denials for advanced team. Radio problems leaving agents unable to communicate. Failure to secure rooftop. Failure to visually block rooftop. BBC reported. The specific Butler failure details represent comprehensive institutional documentation defining the broader operational failure landscape. Let's really dig into the full picture. Alright, so let's really peel this whole thing back. American presidential security specifically operates through various established frameworks. Specific patterns of consistent Secret Service advanced work through traditional norms. Specific patterns include calibrated line-of-sight security through traditional protective frameworks. Specific patterns include established chain of command through established frameworks. The specific Butler failures represent fundamental departure from these traditional standards, regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. The specific House Task Force report context deserves particular attention. A later House Task Force report specifically labeled the attack preventable through their direct quoted characterization. The House Task Force report specifically highlighted the unprotected rooftop as a central flaw through documented analytical framework. The House Task Force report specifically labeled the unprotected rooftop as a fixable flaw through documented analytical conclusion. BBC specifically reported on the documented House Task Force findings through their institutional reporting. The dynamic represents documented bicameral congressional accountability finding, regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. Let me repeat those House Task Force report details. House Task Force report labeled attack preventable, highlighted unprotected rooftop as central flaw, labeled unprotected rooftop as fixable flaw. BBC reported documented bicameral congressional accountability finding. The specific House Task Force report details represent comprehensive institutional documentation defining the broader bipartisan accountability landscape. Think about how specifically both Senate and House congressional reports finding the Butler attack preventable through documented institutional analysis actually functions in comprehensive American institutional accountability. Specific patterns of bicameral congressional accountability findings represent fundamental institutional accountability that documented exceptional cases generate. The dynamic demonstrates comprehensive institutional accountability affecting American constitutional culture, regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. Now let me walk you through the specific Secret Service institutional response context. The Secret Service specifically has suspended 6 personnel over Butler through documented institutional accountability. The Secret Service specifically publicly called Butler an operational failure through their direct quoted characterization. The Secret Service specifically pledged reforms through documented institutional commitment. The Secret Service specifically admitted key problems remained unresolved months after the attack through documented institutional admission. BBC specifically reported on the documented Secret Service institutional response through their institutional reporting. Let me repeat those Secret Service institutional response details. Suspended 6 personnel over Butler, publicly called Butler operational failure, pledged reforms, admitted key problems remain unresolved months after attack. BBC reported, documented Secret Service institutional response. The specific Secret Service institutional response details represent comprehensive institutional documentation defining the broader accountability landscape. Now let me tell you about the specific White House Correspondents' Dinner shooting context. The Washington hotel where the WHCA dinner was held in April 2026 specifically saw a gunman approach the venue through documented institutional event. The gunman specifically was stopped through documented institutional outcome. Republicans specifically have used the incident to push a controversial $400 million plan through documented institutional behavior. The plan specifically involves a secure White House ballroom through documented institutional content. The plan specifically involves an underground bunker through documented institutional content. Axios specifically reported on the documented Republican ballroom and bunker push through their institutional reporting. Let me repeat those White House Correspondents' Dinner shooting details. Washington hotel where WHCA dinner was held in April 2026. Gunman approach venue was stopped. Republicans used incident to push controversial $400 million plan. Secure White House ballroom, underground bunker. Axios reported. The specific White House Correspondents' Dinner shooting details represent comprehensive professional documentation defining the broader political response landscape. Think about how specific Republicans using a stop gunman incident to push a $400 million ballroom and bunker construction project actually functions in comprehensive American political accountability analysis. Specific patterns of leveraging security incidents to justify construction projects represent fundamental analytical concern that documented exceptional cases generate. Dynamic demonstrates comprehensive analytical concern affecting American political culture, regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. Now let me walk you through the specific Wall Street Journal, remarkably easy context. The Wall Street Journal specifically reports getting into the hotel that night was remarkably easy through their direct quoted characterization. Guests specifically say tickets were checked, but not scanned through documented institutional reporting. Guests specifically say IDs were often not requested through documented institutional reporting. Guests specifically say some people got in by flashing what seemed to be a ticket through documented institutional reporting. The Wall Street Journal specifically reported on the documented WHCA hotel access lapses through their institutional reporting. Let me repeat those Wall Street Journal remarkably easy details. Wall Street Journal reports getting into hotel remarkably easy, tickets checked but not scanned, IDs often not requested. Some people got in by flashing what seemed to be ticket. Wall Street Journal reported. The specific Wall Street Journal remarkably easy details represent comprehensive professional documentation defining the broader access failure landscape. Now let me tell you about the specific attendees' reactions context. Attendees specifically reacted with what the hell is going on through their direct quoted statement. Attendees specifically realized how porous access was through documented analytical framework. The hotel specifically is the same site where Ronald Reagan was shot in 1981 through documented historical context. The Wall Street Journal specifically reported on the documented attendee reactions through their institutional reporting. The dynamic represents documented professional reporting on continued security gaps at historically significant venue, regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. Let me repeat those attendees' reactions details. What the hell is going on? Attendee reactions. Realize how porous access was. Same site where Ronald Reagan was shot in 1981. Wall Street Journal reported. The specific attendees' reactions. Details represent comprehensive professional documentation defining the broader institutional concern. Think about how specifically guests at a presidential event, including Trump, cabinet members, and the press, realizing access was remarkably easy at the same hotel where Ronald Reagan was shot in 1981, actually functions in comprehensive American security accountability analysis. Specific patterns of historically significant venue access failures represent fundamental security accountability that documented exceptional cases generate. The dynamic demonstrates comprehensive security, accountability affecting American constitutional culture, regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. Now let me walk you through the specific BBC conspiracy context. A BBC piece specifically documents how conspiracy theories exploded online after the Butler shooting through their institutional reporting. The conspiracy theories specifically include staged claims through documented analytical framework. The conspiracy theories specifically include false flag claims through documented analytical framework. BBC specifically notes that video evidence and eyewitness accounts confirm a real attack and real panic through documented institutional reporting. BBC specifically notes the sheer volume of speculation fuels public distrust through documented analytical framework. The dynamic represents documented mainstream coverage of conspiracy theory ecosystem alongside documented real attack confirmation, regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. Let me repeat those BBC conspiracy details. Conspiracy theories exploded online after Butler shooting. Staged claims, false flag claims. Video evidence and eyewitness accounts confirm real attack and real panic. Sheer volume of speculation fuels public distrust. BBC reported. The specific BBC conspiracy details represent comprehensive professional documentation, defining the broader narrative environment, regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. Now let me tell you about the specific Washington Post Republican response context. The Washington Post specifically shows that most Republican lawmakers initially reacted with prayers and solidarity through their institutional reporting. The Washington Post specifically reports some Republicans quickly blamed Democrats' rhetoric for the attack through their institutional reporting. The Washington Post specifically notes the response turns security failures into another front in the partisan war through documented analytical framework. The dynamic represents documented professional reporting on Republican response patterns, regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. Let me repeat those Washington Post Republican response details. Most Republican lawmakers initially reacted with prayers and solidarity. Some Republicans quickly blamed Democrats' rhetoric for attack, turned security failures into another front in partisan war. Washington Post reported. The specific Washington Post Republican response details represent comprehensive professional documentation, defining the broader political response landscape. Now let me walk you through the specific connection to broader Trump landscape we've covered in previous videos. The Trump's biggest loss in war, Iran fatal mistake we've covered earlier, provides direct context for understanding broader Trump pressure landscape. The Trump impeachment shadow accountability landscape we've covered earlier provides foundation for understanding broader accountability framework. The Trump war on press backfires we've covered earlier provides foundation for understanding broader press accountability landscape. The military leaders take revenge over mass firings we've covered earlier provides foundation for understanding broader institutional accountability. The Trump's own economic record, political liability, we've covered earlier, provides foundation for understanding broader political accountability. The Trump worst news of second-term economic accountability, we've covered earlier, provides foundation for understanding broader economic accountability. The Trump crumbles after federal judge shreds power grab, we've covered earlier, provides foundation for understanding broader legal accountability. The Trump $10 billion scheme collapse, we've covered earlier, provides foundation for understanding broader legal accountability. The Trump devastating mistake after tariff scam collapses, we've covered earlier, provides foundation for understanding broader trade accountability. The Trump 11 p.m. meltdown spree we've covered earlier provides foundation for understanding broader conduct landscape. The Kash Patel FBI director crisis we've covered earlier provides foundation for understanding broader institutional accountability. The Trump Butler shooting security failures we've covered earlier provides direct foundation for understanding the documented security accountability landscape. All these factors together represent comprehensive Trump approach landscape that the documented shooting security failures specifically extend, regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. The implications for understanding actual presidential security oversight deserve particular attention. American voters specifically need accurate information about presidential security oversight through various institutional mechanisms. Specific patterns of documented bipartisan Senate report combined with documented House Task Force preventable finding, combined with documented Wall Street Journal, remarkably easy access reporting, combined with documented Republican $400 million bunker push provide voters with exactly the kind of analytical foundation that affects comprehensive institutional evaluation, regardless of the administration messaging about exceptional security. The accumulated pattern demonstrates comprehensive security oversight concern affecting American voter analysis. Now let me be completely fair for a minute here, because I want to present all sides of this honestly today. Defenders of the GOP response will make several arguments that deserve consideration. They'll argue that security failures sometimes legitimately involve specific institutional considerations beyond pure accountability concerns. They'll argue that ballroom and bunker proposals sometimes reflect specific security considerations beyond pure factual analysis. They'll argue that Republican response patterns sometimes reflect specific partisan considerations beyond pure substantive concerns. They'll argue that media analysis of security failures sometimes involves specific perspectives beyond pure factual analysis. But here's what makes the analysis of the shooting security situation more nuanced. Documented bipartisan Senate 94-page report characterizing Butler as a perfect storm of stunning failure represents documented institutional accountability rather than abstract considerations. Documented House Task Force report labeling attack preventable represents documented bicameral accountability rather than perspectives. Documented Secret Service suspension of 6 personnel and operational failure admission represents documented institutional response rather than perspectives. Documented Wall Street Journal reporting on remarkably easy hotel access with tickets not scanned and IDs not requested represents documented professional reporting rather than abstract considerations. Documented Axios reporting on Republican $400 million ballroom and bunker push represents documented institutional reporting rather than perspectives. Documented BBC coverage of real attack confirmation alongside conspiracy theory explosion represents documented professional reporting rather than perspectives. Documented Washington Post reporting on Republican blame shifting represents documented professional reporting rather than perspectives. Combined with broader Trump landscape patterns, including various previously documented concerns, the cumulative pattern represents comprehensive analytical foundation. The overall pattern represents exactly the kind of comprehensive security accountability concern that deserves serious analysis. All right, let's break this whole thing down into clear points you can take with you today. 4 main takeaways from the GOP in panic as red flags pile up over Trump's shooting security failure scenario. Point number 1, Trump specifically was grazed in the right ear when 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks fired 8 rounds from an AR-15 style rifle from a nearby rooftop, killing 1 person and injuring 2 others before being shot dead by law enforcement. A 94-page bipartisan Senate report specifically called the incident a perfect storm of stunning failure and said Secret Service lapses were predictable, avoidable, and directly linked to the assassination attempt. Point number 2, the Butler failures specifically included no clear chain of command over the security perimeter, poor coordination with local police, resource denials for the advance team, radio problems that left some agents unable to communicate, and failure to secure or visually block the rooftop. Crooks used a later House Task Force report specifically labeled the attack preventable and highlighted the unprotected rooftop as a central fixable flaw. The Secret Service specifically has since suspended 6 personnel over Butler and publicly called it an operational failure. Point number 3, at the Washington Hotel, where the WHCA dinner was held in April 2026, a gunman managed to approach the venue before being stopped. The Wall Street Journal specifically reports that getting into the hotel that night was remarkably easy. Guests specifically say tickets were checked but not scanned, IDs were often not requested, and some people got in by flashing what seemed to be a ticket. Attendees' reactions specifically included "what the hell is going on?" as they realized how porous access was at the same site where Ronald Reagan was shot in 1981. Point number 4, Axios specifically says Republicans quickly rallied around Trump's ballroom and bunker project after the WHCA shooting, arguing that existing venues are too vulnerable and using the scare to justify a $400 million plan critics see as a vanity build funded by secret donors. A BBC piece specifically documents how conspiracy theories exploded online after the Butler shooting, while video evidence and eyewitness accounts confirm a real attack and real panic. The Washington Post specifically shows that most Republican lawmakers initially reacted with prayers and solidarity, but some quickly blamed Democrats' rhetoric for the attack, turning security failures into another front in the partisan war. The cumulative pattern represents comprehensive, accumulating shooting security failure landscape, regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. So let's talk about who actually benefits from honest analysis of documented Trump shooting security failures and who loses when American political figures successfully maintain confident security messaging despite documented bipartisan reports. American voters benefit from accurate information about presidential security oversight through their political decision-making. American constitutional culture benefits from analysis of institutional accountability dynamics. American journalism benefits when systematic institutional analysis applies established frameworks, regardless of political considerations. American democratic culture benefits when systematic analysis of security failures produces accurate evaluation. The comparator family and injured Butler attendees benefit when accurate institutional accountability through documented mainstream reporting addresses real harm. Institutional accountability benefits when accumulated documentation creates ongoing pressure for traditional Secret Service standards. Conspiracy theory ecosystems lose ground when accurate institutional accountability through documented mainstream reporting fills the information space. Because at the end of the day, this whole story about GOP and panic as red flags pile up over Trump shooting security failures is really about whether American Secret Service institutional accountability should be respected regardless of political considerations or systematically obscured through partisan messaging or speculative framing. The documented bipartisan Senate report isn't politically motivated, finding manufactured against anyone. It represents documented bicameral institutional accountability through documented legislative process, regardless of various specific political considerations. The documented House Task Force preventable finding isn't politically motivated, framing manufactured against anyone. It represents documented bicameral institutional accountability through documented legislative process, regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. The documented Secret Service operational failure, admission, and 6 personnel suspensions aren't politically motivated outcomes manufactured against the agency. They represent documented institutional accountability response regardless of various specific political considerations. The documented BBC reporting on Butler failures and findings isn't politically motivated journalism manufactured against anyone. It represents documented international professional reporting applying established journalistic standards regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. The documented Wall Street Journal, remarkably easy access reporting isn't politically motivated coverage manufactured against the administration. It represents documented professional reporting, applying established journalistic standards, regardless of various specific political considerations. The documented Axios reporting on Republican $400 million ballroom and bunker push isn't politically motivated commentary manufactured against Republicans. It represents documented institutional reporting, applying established journalistic standards, regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. The documented Washington Post reporting on Republican blame shifting isn't politically motivated coverage manufactured against Republicans. It represents documented professional reporting applying established journalistic standards regardless of various specific political considerations. The documented BBC coverage of real attack confirmation alongside conspiracy theory explosion isn't politically motivated framing manufactured against anyone. It represents documented professional reporting applying established journalistic standards regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. The Comparator family loss and injured attendees aren't political material. They represent real American family and individual loss that documented mainstream institutional accountability through traditional Secret Service standards aims to honor. All these legitimate aspects of American institutional accountability deserve substantive engagement rather than dismissive characterization through confident security messaging or speculative framing, regardless of specific political considerations affecting various political preferences. Whether American constitutional culture eventually produces appropriate response to current security accountability patterns depends on whether accumulated documentation eventually produces meaningful institutional consequences affecting how future Secret Service operations engage with their own accountability during extended periods. The documented Butler perfect storm of stunning failure combined with documented WHCA remarkably easy access and documented Republican $400 million bunker push aren't going away, regardless of how aggressively any political faction characterizes specific institutional findings as politically motivated. Their continued existence as documented institutional accountability realities creates ongoing American constitutional culture pressure that traditional accountability mechanisms should address through appropriate substantive engagement rather than continued confident messaging or speculative framing patterns affecting various specific situations during extended political periods. All right, that's where we're going to leave it today, folks. Coming up next, we're digging into exactly how American institutional analysts are evaluating current Secret Service accountability dynamics during this period. Stay tuned.